This lady, she's pretty, isn't she? But if I was live and I was presenting this in front of you, I would have asked, what is wrong with this picture? But now, since you cannot give me the answer, let me let you know what's wrong with the picture. So if you look at this gentleman, he's got his lab coat that is well buttoned up. It is very vital that when you go and get or buy or purchase your lab coat, that it must be well fitted and also that it can button up with you still feeling comfortable in it. And also, what is very important for those of you who have long hair, when or before you're going to enter the lab, you need to ensure that you have tied your hair up. But we will cover the hair topic on a later slides. Another thing that I always say is please wear proper closed shoes. This is also vital, and you will see on the next few slides why it is very important to have proper closed shoes. Lastly, on this slide, also what I can advise for students, which I cannot enforce, is preferably wear long pants when you can before coming into the lab. It is also just to prevent yourself, you trying to limit any exposure of skin for in case you are in the lab and should anything happen. But as I've said, I cannot enforce this. It is just an advice at this particular point in time. But rest assured, making sure that you are wearing a lab coat and the lab coat is well fitted and buttoned up is something that I have to enforce. We'll talk more about other rules that you need to adhere to. Continuing on this topic, you will be required to have safety goggles. What I mean about that is if you are wearing prescribed glasses that were prescribed by a doctor, you are excused from wearing safety goggles. But you need to make sure that you go and purchase the safety specs, or we refer to as safety goggles as well, from the Neil C pharmacy called Stelco at our university premises. Please ensure that you do have a lab coat that you purchase from there, as well as the safety specs. Lastly, on the slide is you need to you will be given also gloves that you can use while you are in the lab. I will talk more about all these aspects as we continue. One of the rules about being in the lab, we always say to students, keep calm and put your lab coat on at all time. It doesn't matter how hot it is outside, you are required to wear a lab coat when you are in the lab. Another thing is you will realize that there are a lot of acids or a lot of solvents or solutions that we make use of that are as clear as water. So if there is any bottle that is not labeled in the lab, kindly do not use it. Don't even touch it. I don't want you to be turned into a zombie. You cannot assume that everything in the lab is water. There are chemicals that are really truly dangerous. Another thing is, I know I'll be speaking a lot about a couple of very important safety aspects in the lab, of which I've covered the lab coat as well as the closed shoes and tying up of your hair. But I know you might forget all of these things. But please make note of these because I take safety very seriously, and we need to all keep ourselves safe. So what they did is once they asked this question to students, why are we wearing a lab coat? And the majority of the students came up with the answer that says it makes them feel like a scientist. Well, to be precise, wearing a lab coat is actually not that you can only feel like a scientist, but more vitally so that it protects you from dangerous chemicals and acids. So we'll talk more about this on the next slide. This is actually an incident that took place at the university. A student was working and there was a fire that took place. This happened in a fume hood, and this was the results of what had transpired. Just imagine this student was not wearing a lab coat, not even wearing pants that cover the whole of his leg. Can I leave that thought to your imagination? I hope now you get a better picture of why we need to wear lab coats in the lab. Another thing that you need to know before coming into the lab, we will be issuing you with what we call a preg manual. A preg manual will have all the assets and practical experiments that you're going to be using before coming into the lab. For example, if you are coming to do practical 1, you will see before you get to the experimental part, that we list all the chemicals, all the apparatus that you're going to be making use of. When it comes to the chemicals, we have a system that is called the global harmonized system. What that means is each and every chemical and or an asset that we actually purchase comes with the symbols that you see on the slides. What these symbols are saying is they are talking to you. So you need to sort of listen and adhere to what they are telling you. For example, if the acid bottle or the chemical say it is corrosive, it means if you get it onto your skin, it will burn like hell. Also, just another example, if it says it is highly flammable, as one of the symbols that you see on this slide, it means please do not use it next to the fire because you might get all of us into explosion. So please just adhere to these symbols that you will see in your career. That will be shown in either one of the chemicals or assets that you make use of. Another thing about this global harmonized system is it was made global for that particular reason. So whether you are in the USA or Asia or Africa, these symbols are talking the same language to everybody who's everywhere in the world. So take cognizance of them. Another thing that I want you to be aware of is when you are researching any chemical or acid that we must be using in the lab, you will come across something that we call an SDS. An SDS stands for Safety Data Sheet. What is important about this safety data sheet is that it tells you more about a specific chemical or acid. For example, on this slide you have a silver nitrate, and if you look at this two parts of the SDS that I've put here, it will tell you about the label that is on the actual bottle itself, and as previously said on the previous slide, here you see those symbols that are indicated, and they are already telling you what silver nitrate is like. It is flammable, it is corrosive, and etc. But what is also vital about reading this document is the healthy first aid precautions that you need to take. If we look on the part that is shown on the right hand side, you will see, for example, it tells you what you need to do if you get the silver nitrate into your eye. What it stipulates there, it says, if in the eyes, please rinse cautiously with water for several minutes, remove contact lenses if present and easy to do. Continue rinsing, immediately call, in our case, you can either call myself or the lecturer on duty, or even tell one of your demonstrators who are in the lab to assist you. This is very important that you report any little incident that happens. If it gets to your skin, please, you need to go under the tap and wash yourself properly for as long as the burn is still there until the burn has been removed. So before you come into the lab, I just want to plead with you students to go and research any chemical or acid that we'll be using for that particular experiment. Look at the SDS and read through it and get yourself more equipped before coming into the lab. One of the things that you learned when you were in matric is how when you have to prepare reagents or solutions, especially ones that involve acid, you never add water to an acid. It is always the other way around. If you have been taught very well, you know what type of reaction that happens when you're mixing water and acid. It emits heat, which means it is exothermic. So you need to make sure that you can control the amount of heat that the acid emits when it reacts with water. Hence, we are doing it with acid on water and not water on acid. What you need to know about gloves is they are there as a protection, a first protection layer for yourself, for your hands. Should anything happen, like an acid gets into your glove, the very first thing that you do is to remove the glove and you get rid of that pair and you wash your hands, dry them, and make sure that you get a new pair of gloves. So they are just there as a first layer of protection. So just be aware there are certain acids that can get through the gloves if you do not remove them very quickly. Another thing is, just when you're working with acid, you always have to be cautious. This is an acid ban that took place in one of the labs where a student was using a very dangerous acid and was not wearing gloves, and that's an acid ban. So you do not want that to happen to you. Always be cautious and rather wear gloves, but also having gloves on doesn't mean that you have to be stupid or ignorant. Always ensure that you're still working safe. There are different type of gloves that you will get in the industry. The one that we provide in the lab is what we refer to as nitrile gloves. For some particular strange reason, there are students who are allergic to nitrile. So if you are one of them, please do ask us for latex gloves. Latex gloves are commonly used by the doctors, which you also are aware of. If you were to use much more stronger acid that are very, very corrosive, you will wear something stronger than nitrile or latex. Hence, you have the other two that are there. But those you will probably get to make use of when you get to the industry. Now we get to a point where we say closed shoes. What do we mean by closed shoes? I've put through several examples, so ensure that you do not have any of the ones that are crossed in red. If you do come to a lab, unfortunately, without closed shoes and a lab coat or safety goggles, I will have to actually not allow you to enter the lab, which is gonna mean that you're gonna miss out on a practical, and you don't want that to happen. Just for more example, why do we actually stress that you need closed shoes? This was one of the incidents that also took place at the university. One of our postgraduate students came into the lab and not having closed shoes. They really wanted to put a reaction on, and they thought, this might be a good idea. Don't you think so? And Murphy's Law happened that day. So you definitely don't want to end up with such acid bands on your feet. So please be cautious and wear your closed shoes. Also, the safety goggles that we are referring to, or safety specs for that matter, they are there to protect your eyes. So you don't want to end up like Carol. Carol never wore her safety goggles. Now she doesn't need them. It's a funny one that I've put there, but on a very serious note, we always say to students, rather be wise and protect your eyes. And we actually have had incidences that we know of our other colleagues from other universities who have lost their eyesight because of acid that went into their eye, and they didn't have the safety goggles or the safety specs to protect their eyes. So they are there to protect your eyes. Ensure that you are wearing them at all ways. And as I have previously emphasized, they are not a hairband. Please do not wear them on your forehead. You do not have your eyes there. They are always supposed to be covering and protecting your eyes. I am fully aware that safety goggles or safety specs are not the most comfortable item that you can wear in the lab, but for your own protection, you need to adhere and just make sure that you are always wearing them. There are a few other rules that we need to ensure that you do not do in the lab. One of them is we always say to students, do not use your cell phone in the lab. And I would have asked you if I was live as well, that what is wrong with the picture. But what you can see is this particular person is working with something dangerous, obviously, because he's wearing gloves. But then he gets a call. So what he does with whatever that he has touched, whatever chemicals he has touched that are on his glove, he's touching his phone, and from the phone he's touching his face. So what is happening here is you are transferring this acid residue from your glove to the phone and to your face, which you might end up actually getting acid burns on your face. So we always say when you are wearing gloves, you do not touch anything else besides what you are working with in the lab. If you happen that you need to take a call that is very urgent, I always say to students, remove your gloves, excuse yourself from the lab, go outside and make sure that you answer after you have cleaned your hands. But to make it even easier during the time that you are in the lab, I always say just switch off your cell phone. Anybody that misses you for 2 or 3 hours that you're gonna be in the lab, you can always get back to them afterwards. Another thing that you need to make sure of is do not be wearing or makeup inside the lab. If you want to wear makeup, just do it before you enter the lab. The lab is not a place where you will be doing that and applying all kind of things. Thank goodness we have now masks. You're not going to be allowed to put anything on your lips for that matter. Another thing, we have designed the labs to be after lunch for a particular reason, because we want you to eat before you get into the lab. You are not allowed to eat anything when you are in the lab. There are particular reasons why we don't allow any eating in the lab. The lab is a place where there is a lot of fumes that you are unaware of, that you cannot see in your naked eye. So all the surfaces, as much as they are cleaned, you never know what has been on that bench that you are working on. So you might be putting something that you think it is safe, putting it in your mouth, and you might be taking some acids that you are unaware of. Another thing, not drinking of any kind of thing in the lab. If you do happen to bring a water bottle with you, which you cannot actually now drink when you need to be wearing mask, we always say if you feel that you are thirsty, take your bottle. After taking off your gloves, step outside of the lab, have a little bit of a sip of the water and come back into the lab. Close your bottle and put it in your bag. You are not allowed to have anything to drink in the lab. Lastly, we spoke about the hair. If you've got long hair, you need to tie up your hair. There are two main reasons why we need our head to be away from us. One is to make sure we use a lot of fires in the lab. What I mean about fire, I mean a Bunsen burner, which actually causes fire because you're using LPG gas. So if that gets into your hair, hair is very flammable. So you will burn your hair. Another thing is you never know when you are busy working on the lab that the bench might have a spillage of an acid, and if your hair touches that bench which contains the spillage, it will absorb that acid, which will end up being on your skin. So be cautious about that, and please always tie up your hair before you enter the lab. Now that you've known about those other rules, let's continue. As much as we clean our lab and we ensure that they are very safe before you enter the lab, there's things that happen, like a spillage that previously happened. We've cleaned it, but some acids, they take longer to be removed from surface. So if you were to pick up something from the floor, we always say use this what we call a squatting process. So you're just gonna squat down, pick up whatever you need to pick up. Even when you need to take glassware from your lockers, we say to students, instead of going on your knees, where your knees are exposed to the floor, which might still have maybe a broken glass that was left there by mistake, we don't want your knees to be cut. So ensure that you squat so you get to do a little bit of exercise when you are in the lab. As I said, lab is fun. Another thing, if you have a curious nose, as I say to people, and you want to stick your nose to anything that you find in the lab, please do not do it this way. If you want to smell anything in the lab, we always say, please just whiff or waft, depending on how you want to pronounce it. So you just hold the thing slightly away from yourself and you blow some air so that you can get the smell of any chemical or anything that we make use of. There are really some dangerous chemicals that if you were to just use them or smell them directly from their container, they will knock you off. So we do not want this to happen. So if you want to smell something, we always say use the whiff process. Another very important thing, which some of you might actually get to this slide and just want to laugh about it, but it is very vital. If you do know that you are pregnant, please, we kindly ask that you let us know. You can either speak to myself or speak to the lecturer in charge. If you don't feel comfortable speaking to any of us, you can speak to also your demonstrator that is allocated to look after you when you are in the lab. Why we ask you to have this information up front is there are chemicals that are very dangerous when you're using them, especially to the growth of your fetus. So before your baby comes to this world, they need to be protected. And in the lab, we need to ensure that you are also protected and the future of your baby is as well. So if you are aware that you are pregnant, let us know so that when we get to those chemicals or those practicals that have chemicals that can endanger the growth of your baby, we can actually make an alternative plan for you. This is treated confidentially. We will not discuss your private matter with anybody else. So if you tell us this, we ensure that we will protect you and protect the secret that you have shared with us. So please feel free to come forth. Also, another thing that you need to know about the lab, once you've entered into the lab, there are few very crucial and important things that you need to be aware of. One of them is what we refer to as an emergency shower. What we refer to as this emergency shower, what it is used for is should anything happen to you. Let's say you have a spillage on yourself of any kind of acid. The first thing that we always ask students to do if it's a huge spillage is to remove their lab coat, because the lab coat also works as a protection for yourself. So you remove the lab coat and we will put you under the shower, which is actually cold water for a particular reason because I don't want you guys to be using it. So you will be there for at least about 15 to 20 minutes. And just to add, these emergency showers are not private, so when you use them, everybody's watching you. So please rather be careful and not get yourself under an emergency shower. In the whole time I've been the leader of this building in first year, I've never had to put a student under an emergency shower. So please work carefully at all times. Another thing that you need to be aware of is where the eye wash station is. Usually it's found in the front part of the lab, where the middle section, where usually there's a little podium, there is an eye wash station there. So be aware where it is. As previously discussed when I was discussing the GHS, that if anything goes into your eye, you need to also wash it for at least minimum 15 to 20 minutes, so that you make sure that whatever chemical or acid got into your eye, it is properly washed. Another thing that you need to be aware of is we always have first aid kit in the lab. But please, if you have never been trained or you do not have level 1 at least training of the first aid, do not come close to the first aid kit. Should anything happen to a student, rather refer the matter to one of the demonstrators or to myself, and we will assist you with first aid when it is required. So do not be afraid. If anything happens in the lab, which accidents do happen, just rather own up so that we can assist you and help you. Another thing you need to be aware of is where the fire extinguishers are in the lab. Should there be a fire in the lab, one of the things that I always ask from the students is just to alert us and make us aware that there is fire. We will come and deal with fire. I will talk more about the fire extinguishers on the next slide. So what causes fire? Fire has three sources. One is heat, oxygen, and fuel. So what you need to do is to just cut off one of the three sources to extinguish any fire. So how we do that in the lab is there are two ways. We have what we refer to as a fire blanket. So if you have never used a fire blanket, please do not attempt it. As I have said previously, if there is a fire in the lab, let us aware of it and we will handle it. So how the fire blanket works is you need to pull it off its pocket, and you need to hold and protect your hands by covering your hands first by holding the handles of the fire blanket. Make sure that you cover the fire with the fire blanket, and what will happen is the oxygen will be stopped from entering as part of the sources of the fire, and you will be able to extinguish the fire in that sense. So a fire blanket is actually a nice tool to have also in your house, in your kitchen when you need one. Another and most famous thing that usually most people use is what we refer to as a fire extinguisher. So what we have in our building is two types. We have a dry powder and we have a carbon dioxide. So with those two, we are able to cover all kind of sources of fires that we can get. As you can see, the dry powder can extinguish solids, the flammable liquids, the flammable gases, and electrical equipment, while the carbon dioxide can do also cooking oils and fats. Just a quick training on how to use the fire extinguisher. The way you do it is when you go into the fire extinguisher, one of the things that you need to make sure is it has a pin, and that pin has to be secured. What that tells you is that fire extinguisher has never been used before, which indicates that it is still full, therefore it can be used. What you do first is to remove the pin, and you will have to hold the fire extinguisher in such a way that the body doesn't actually touch your hand, because the fire extinguisher can be extremely cold once it is released. But the way you also do it is you extinguish from the bottom of the fire and not at the top of the fire. What I need to emphasize when it comes to this slide is if you have never received any training on how to use a fire extinguisher, please do not attempt to be a hero and use it. Rather make enough noise to alert us and let people who are trained to extinguish fires to come and do it. There is legal implication. If you ever touch a fire extinguisher and you are not trained for it and that fire was not extinguished, you will be liable for any damages that was caused by the fire. So to be very important and very adhering to the regulations, if you've never been trained, rather make enough noise and alert us. We will take care of the fire. Another thing that you need to know in the lab is nothing goes down the drain of any lab unless it is distilled water or pure water. If you have acids or if you are using any chemicals to prepare your experiment or to do your experiment, once you are finished with those chemicals, we have what we refer to as a hazardous waste. This 25 liters will be found in the middle section of the lab on the table, and they'll be well labeled. So for each and every experiment, there will be this waste container. So what you do is once you have finished working or finished preparing and doing your practical, your stuff that you have used, you go and discard them into this waste container. So please ensure that you do not put anything down the drain in the lab, because we love our environment. Whatever you put down in the drain ends up somewhere in the world, and we don't want to cause or be part of contributing to making our environment not clean. So make sure, please, that you always put your waste in what we refer to as a waste container. We will talk more about other types of waste that you find in the lab, but if it's just liquids and stuff like that that you are using, you use the waste container that you will find in the middle bench of the lab. And if there's other waste like papers, I will tell you more about it on the slides that are coming. And just be aware, when you walk into the lab, you will find the lab clean. We always are making sure that the lab is clean before the students come in. So we expect you to leave the lab the way you have found it. You cannot enter into a clean lab and leave it in a dirty way. We ask, please, once you have used up all your glassware, you're gonna have to wash them. Once you finish washing them, put them back into your locker, which you will be allocated during the time when you are busy doing your experiments or your practicals with us. And also just make sure that you wipe your bench, and especially now with COVID-19 pandemic, we always have to be cautious about where we're working and sanitize everything. There will be wipes all over in the lab. Please feel free to take a wipe and just wipe your bench once you are done, or even before you start working, and make sure that you leave the lab the way you found it. Just remember that you're not the only student using the lab. There are other students on different programs that are also using the lab. So please be responsible and clean and put everything where you found it. That's good lab practice, and that is vital for us in the lab. Another thing that you need to be aware of when it comes to the lab is you will see a lot of different color-coded bins. And these bins are actually also talking to you. As on a previous slides, I've spoken about the hazardous waste container. That is all the liquids that you make use of in the lab. They go into that waste container, except for water. If you're just rinsing your glassware, you can throw that down the drain. But if there is any acid or chemical, please use the waste container. If you look at the slide, the blue bin is telling you about the glass or the broken glasses, that if you do happen to break any glassware in the lab, the small pieces that we collect go into the blue bin. Please, students, I have to emphasize this. You do not put anything else in the blue bin unless it is broken glass. If you have paper or anything else, it goes to a different bin. Actually, on that note, all the waste paper that you are using in the lab go into a black bin. As you notice, there's not a picture of a black bin, but we all know how a black bin looks like. So use that when it comes to papers or anything that you use to wipe your benches with. It goes into a black bin. The red bin is all the gloves that you're going to be wearing or using in the lab. Once you have used them and you want to get rid of them, you put them in the what we refer to as the red bin. What you will see is there is actually a bin that has a red bag, but is actually in a box in our particular lab. So that serves the same as also the bins where you're gonna use to put your used gloves on. And also, if you see any yellow containers as on the picture, that's where all the pasture pipettes that you might be using, the plastic pasture pipettes, please, not the glass one. The glass one, hopefully you're not gonna break, but if you break it, it goes into a blue one. But the plastic pasture pipettes, they go into the yellow containers. If you were to use syringes and stuff like that also in the lab, you will be required to put those into the yellow bins. Why we have all these systems in the lab to make sure that our waste is controlled is because we have companies that come to collect all our waste. So for example, if they open the glass bin, which is a blue one, and they find that you have papers in there, they will refuse to take that bin, the glass bin. So hence it is vital that you put the correct waste in a correct bin always when you are in the lab. One of the other things is when you're bringing bags that are in with you into the lab, please ensure that you put them on the sides of the lab. Why we require this? Should there be an alarm, maybe be a fire alarm in the lab or any sort of an alarm that will alert us that there is a situation in the building, we will need to evacuate the building. And the way we do this is we do not want anything that we can stumble over. So we make sure that all the bags are put on the sides of the lab. So as you enter the lab, on the side where the bench ends, that's where you can use to put your bags. Please avoid to let your bags be lying in a place where we're gonna need to use should we evacuate the building. On that note, if there is any alarm that happens while you are still in the lab, the protocol is you stop what you are doing. If you are using flame at that particular time, please just close the gas tap and you take your bag if there is time. If there is no time, please you steadily walk out of the lab, and we need to walk out through into outside using the main entrance of the building. So you go out using the main entrance of the building, and then from there you need to go to what we could refer to as an emergency point. The emergency point is situated close to Polymer Science Building. There is a tree if you were to go that way, and that's where we all need to gather so that we take a roll call and ensure that everybody who was present in the lab is actually outside as well, or present in the building is outside of the building. And please ensure that you do not run out of the building. Depending also where the fire is, we might need to use different emergency doors. So please be aware where your nearest emergency door is so that you know which one to use should the fire be at the place where we cannot use the main entrance door. So keep that in mind. Second, lastly, I ask you, just before you come into the lab, please use your brain. Think all the time about what you are doing. Safety is our #1 priority. As much as we want to get through the practicals, as much we want to get through your studies as quickly as possible, but having to do everything safely in the lab will actually ensure that you get great results. So I always say, always remember safety first. If you do not hang yourself, I'll probably hang you. I'm joking. So we also say there is no stupid question in the lab. If you do not know what to do, that's why we have demonstrators which will be wearing black lab coats. They are there to assist you. You are allowed to ask them any questions that are related to the practical, as well as maybe if you are interested in knowing about their research work, because most of our demonstrators are people or students that are doing postgraduate studies. You might actually be interested in knowing what they do so that you can maybe one day become a master's or a PhD student in chemistry, hopefully. So we always say there's never a stupid question. There are stupid people who don't ask questions. So please do ask. We welcome any kind of question that you want to ask so that we can be able to assist you. That's why we are there. And you will find out that with the practical manual that you would receive, there is what we call a periodic table. We have given each and every student a periodic table that you need to use for the whole year. So this, when you are writing tests, when you are writing exams, you are allowed to have your periodic table that is issued and given to you by us. But for some other particular reason, if you do misplace it, you can always come to my office and I will be selling it to you for 20 rands, because those periodic table, they did cost us to make. So we're giving you one, so keep it safe, keep it responsible, please. If you do lose it, come and just give us some money. We always put it towards our end of the year function kitty. So we will, on that note, I just want to say thank you for contributing. Lastly, lab is really fun. It is enjoyable. It is not as scary as I have made out to be. I was just making you just to be aware and to always be alert, because safety is our #1 priority. The way you arrive in the lab is the way I want you to leave and get home as safely as possible. Thank you for taking the time to listen to me. I hope you have learned something about the safety. And please, if you do have any questions prior to coming into the practical, your first practical, and you want to know, feel free to ask any of our demonstrators, lecturers, or particularly myself. We will be willing to answer any of your questions that are related to safety and any other things related to the practical. Have a good one and have a good year.